Hey everybody, thank you for joining. Great to have you here. We are going to get started. We'll give people, 60 seconds or so before we jump in. Please introduce yourself in the chat. We want to know where you're coming in from. I am in the DC suburbs right now, in our room. I'm going to explain why Leah isn't here, but she's going to be here pretty soon. Let us know. Vicky, great to see you from Philly, from Southern Maryland. Connie, great to have you. Oregon, Phoenix, Washington, New Jersey, Ohio, St. Louis. This is the movement, y'all. This is folks who are gathering where they are to build power where they are to actually have an impact in this moment. I know this is a very rough week. I know there's a lot of damage being done. I also know that Donald Trump is not king. He is barely president. We can't fight back, and fighting back looks like organizing locally, talking with each other, sharing information. We're going to get started. I'm getting into it. I'm just excited to see everybody. It's great to see you all. I'm going to give people another 45 seconds maybe before we get in. We've got a lot of Q&A to get into, a little to cover. The last 72 hours has been quite eventful. I'm just watching the chat. This is one of my favorite parts of Indivisible calls, y'all. If you're brand new here, welcome. We need you. We want you in this. We need folks who are new to the movement. If you're scared by all the chat, this is just enthusiasm, y'all. This is just democracy in real time. We love to have you here. We're hoping that this is a welcoming environment. This is a fun environment that's informative, that it's useful. Fundamentally, that it's useful. We're here to have impact most of all. We got a ton of folks joining from all across the country. From Hawaii to New York to Minnesota to North Carolina to Virginia to Texas to Colorado to Maine. I hope everybody gets a sense of how big this movement is, how many people actually share your values, your concerns. It can feel really isolating and lonely when you've got a Donald Trump in the White House, when you've got Republicans controlling Congress, when you've got them pushing forward their agenda. And part of what we have to do is show each other that we're not alone. That's part of the reason why we're all here. Okay, we're 3 minutes in. I know a lot of people are still joining. We got about 1,500 folks on, but people can keep on joining. I want to get into it. I think probably the first question on everybody's mind right now is where the heck is Leah? She is normally here, and I can promise you in about 10 minutes or so, she will walk through that door and come in here. As part of our role as co-leaders of Indivisible, we are invited to brief or yell at members of Congress or partners or others. She is doing one or several of those things right now. It was an important enough meeting that she needed to be doing it with senior congressional leadership. But she is going to come in a bit, and she'll help me answer questions because that's what we do here. Normally, I start these calls with the why, just to set the stage. If you're brand new here, I want you to know why are you spending your time on a Thursday afternoon? And I heard a phrase yesterday, at first from Hank Green, and then I read it in an Ezra Klein article that really resonated with me. And I was like, that is such a good explanation of the why of why do we do these calls? Why are we here? And the phrase was the attention oligarchy. I don't know if people read this article or saw Hank Green talking about it, but there was this picture at the inauguration of all these billionaires that gave money to Trump for the inauguration. These were billionaires who control TikTok or Facebook, or Instagram, Google, Twitter, etc. And the key thing is, yes, these are classic oligarchs in the sense that they're engaging in pay to play corruption with the administration. Like that's what oligarchs do, but they're not just typical oligarchs, right? They are oligarchs who control many of the distribution mechanisms for how we get our news and how we get our information, how we tell what the truth is, how we develop a sense of what is happening in the world. And they are all lined up right behind this guy at inauguration. They they're controlling what information goes into our brain. So the why for this call, a big part of the why for this call is we are a pro-democracy movement, right? We have to have shape spaces where we can share what is the truth. We have to have spaces where we can strategize based on that truth. And if what we are doing is fighting against this corrupt alliance between the attention oligarchs and this authoritarian government, we can't rely on the oligarchs to provide that space for us. It's just not going to work. We have to create spaces on our own. We have to take steps to create our own sources of information, to create our own spaces for discussion and create these networks for collaboration. That's what we're doing so that we can have impact. That's what we're trying to do here. This isn't everything. This isn't the only space you have. This is Indivisible isn't the only newsletter you're going to read or the email you're going to read, but I do think it's important that we have these places so that we can effectively fight back, so that we can have impact. So with that in mind, that's like about a high level why of why we're all here, I hope. With that in mind, a little bit of house cleaning before we get into more of the content. First of all, if you're brand new here, most of this is going to be Q&A, hopefully about 45 minutes or so of Q&A. Some of the questions came in well ahead of time. We got a ton. We try to bucketize those so we can get through as many as possible. And you also have the ability to ask questions live. Now, we're doing a new thing this week. If you've been here a whole bunch, you might have not done it this way, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom in your Zoom. And this, if you use the Q&A function to ask questions, it'll just make it a lot easier for me to go through and be like, oh, I can answer that, I can answer that, I can answer that, and go through quickly. So if you could, please try to use the Q&A function, and we'll bounce back and forth between questions that came in ahead of time and questions that are coming in live. We want this to be an authentic conversation. If you're looking for links that are showing up in the chat, they're going to go pretty fast. Hopefully you get them. If you can't get them, we're going to follow up with an email. And that email is going to have a recording of this, and it's going to have all the links that we mentioned. So you're going to have access to all of that. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to take the information, send it on to friends, family members, Indivisible group members, other groups. We're trying to make this as easy as possible. Uh, Last note on a couple last notes on housekeeping. One, we've been doing these every Thursday at 3 p.m. In the survey that we sent out, I was actually kind of surprised. Overwhelmingly, people said, yeah, 3 p.m. Thursdays is working out for me. I thought there might be more appetite for evenings or weekends. We will continue to ask, we will continue to experiment, but for the time being, it looks like this is working for folks. We're getting good attendance, the audience is building. That feels good. So we'll do another one on January 30th, and then we'll do a real step back. We will have done a full month of these every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll ask y'all, is this worth doing? Are you getting something out of this? Should we continue doing it? We do these not so I can talk on a Zoom at y'all. You don't want that. I don't want that. We're doing this hopefully because it's useful to all of us building a pro-democracy movement. And so then the last housekeeping note I'll note, which we say every time, is about respect. Lowercase d democratic spaces like this are messy by their nature, and that's fine. I'm good with that kind of mess. We've been organizing a kind of messy democratic spaces for the better part of a decade. My only ask to everyone here is just please do your part to keep the chat box as constructive as possible. You don't have to agree with everything I'm saying or everything that your friends on the chat are saying, but just try to make it constructive. We're this diverse nationwide movement, and treating each other with respect, especially when we disagree with each other, that's just foundational to how we're able to organize and have impact together. Just a note on that survey, I mentioned the timing in the survey. We've been doing these surveys after every single call to try to get your feedback, make things better, get your input on questions that were raised that we didn't have great answers to. Uh, we did see some requests for more interaction. So I'm going to encourage everybody to stay on into the Q&A and as long as you can. At some point in the middle of the Q&A, we got some questions about the DNC race. And this caused some internal discussion in Indivisible. How should we be engaging? How does the movement feel about this? And so I do actually want to ask you all. I want to ask you all take a temperature check. It's not a formal poll, but it's a temperature check of do you think Indivisible should be engaging? How should we be engaging? And from that, we'll actually maybe take some action this weekend to wade in there. We also got some questions about, or I asked a question about who were the Dems that you're really happy with right now. I think that's going to come out in the Q&A, so I'll hold for the Q&A to actually go over the Dems that people are really loving in this moment. Okay, done with housekeeping. We're going to get to Q&A. Leah is going to join us in about 5 minutes. I'm not stalling for time. I actually did want to cover something before Leah gets here, and something we've talked a lot about over the last 3 days. Look, where are we now? We're in the second Trump term. That is where we are. And Trump kicked off with this barrage of executive orders. His supporters have called it shock and awe. For me, I'm not shocked. I'm not in awe. Much of this was predictable. We predicted, but the Indivisible movement, broader folks who were in alliance with us predicted this. A great deal of it is directly taken from the pages, the 900 pages of Project 2025. Trump swore up and down. He had nothing to do with Project 2025. We said, obviously, this is going to drive his administration. Lo and behold, upon taking office, how is he governing? With Project 2025. And look, there's a lot that's gone through the attack on birthright citizenship that a judge just ruled against. These the pardons for January 6th seditionists, this anti-LGBTQ attacks, anti-trans stuff, anti-immigrant stuff. I'm not going to cover everything here. There's too much. If you're on this call, you're probably paying attention. You have a lot of information. I'll post a good resource on that front if you want to dig in deeper, but you don't need to hear me give you a total overview of everything that has gone down over the last 72 hours. But I did want to take this opportunity to focus on one specific executive order, and it's this order that's not getting as much of attention, and I'll tell you why I want to focus on it. But it's the order that rescinds guidance to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, from the Department of Homeland Security. It rescinds guidance that keeps ICE out of hospitals and churches and schools, keeps those places safe from raids. Uh, and the reason why I want to focus on this is because the entire idea of shock and awe is to make Trump and his cohort look all powerful and to make you feel powerless. And I wanted to focus on this EO not because it's the biggest or the most important and most damaging. You can make arguments for many of the others, but it is very actionable. There is actually something you can do about you, wherever you are, you can do about it. And in fact, children and families in your own community who are under threat right now, they could use your help. So that is why I want to focus a little bit on this one before we get to Q&A. And Leo, like I said, we'll be here in about 3 minutes. So for background, for about 15 years, going back to Obama's first term, ICE has been prohibited from raiding schools or hospitals or churches. These are what's known as sensitive locations. Now, the logic of this, if you think about it for a second, is quite clear. You don't want to discourage immigrants from doing real pro-social stuff like going to church or dropping their kids off to school or getting medical attention when they need it. You want them to do those things. Now, to be clear, if ICE has a signed judicial warrant, all bets are off. If the violent criminal is hiding in a church, ICE can go after them. But for the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, you don't do it. Now, that logic, I mean, this is surprising to me. I'm not an immigration expert by training, but that logic carried us through the Obama first term, through the Obama second term, and then, yes, through Trump's first term. Trump did not rescind that in his first term. That would have been too wacky, too extreme, even for Donald Trump, circa 2017. Biden then comes in and expands it to include preschools, daycares, playgrounds, other similar areas. But here we come to this week. And Trump on his first day, not only does he take away Biden's expansion, he scraps the whole damn thing. He has told ICE, go ahead, raid the preschools. Go ahead, raid the elementary schools, raid the churches, raid the hospitals. Here's the thing. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I'm going to say it a lot over the next 4 years. We do not have to meekly give in to Trump's directives. Depending on the issue, depending on where we live, we may have power to fight back at the federal level, at the state level, or the local level. And in this specific case, focusing on this issue, our power is local. Hundreds of school districts across the country have adopted what's known as it's a safe zone resolution. And basically what it says is, hey, we're going to protect immigrants and their children from ICE terrorizing them. That's basically what it says. Now, hundreds have adopted that resolution. Hundreds have. But there are more than 10,000 school districts in this country. Your local school board can and should adopt one of these resolutions. And in the last 24 hours, we've been working with those fine folks at NEA, the teachers union, to put together some briefing materials and sample resolution. Literally 10 minutes ago, we got this cleared. So there's a 16-page Google Doc that I'm going to put in the chat. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the last 72 hours, if you're not sure what you should do, or even if it's worth doing anything at all, this isn't everything. This isn't going to solve all of our problems. But you know what this is? This is a bite-sized thing you can do. This is a real actionable thing you can do. This is something that will measurably improve the lives of children and families in your own community, and it will demonstrate to them that they're not alone. That yes, their administration might be attacking them, but they got folks in their own community that are looking out for them. At Indivisible, we want to be informed, we want to share information, we want to share truth, but most of all, we want to take that information and take action. That's why we do what we do. That was a big windup. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully, the information that we're putting together for you is useful. And with that, we're going to turn to Q&A. So I'm just going to remind you, we've already got 100 questions just in the Q&A that has come in so far. We're going to get through as many of these questions as possible, and we're going to bounce back and forth between questions that came in ahead of time and questions that are coming in live. So please use the Q&A function right at the bottom of your Zoom to ask questions. And while we wait for Leah, I'm gonna start out by jumping into some of the first questions that came in. First category of questions that we got from the movement was around resisting Project 2025. And we got a question from Linda in North Carolina. And she asked, are there any Democrats we can count on to fight this tyranny? Which is a very good strategic question because half of the battle right now is where we can weakening GOP resolve, MAGA resolve, making sure that they understand that there's a political consequence to pay for pursuing a deeply unpopular agenda. We want to fracture their coalition. You see this right now around the pardons, right? Democrats, of course, would criticize the pardons, but Republicans are criticizing the pardons too. This is so far beyond the pale that you see folks criticizing Trump for issuing pardons of violent offenders, for folks who attacked cops. Oh, I hear Leah coming in right now. Welcome, Leah. I hope the meeting went well. So we're answering the first question right now on are there Democrats we can count on to fight the tyranny? And so part of this is weakening the Republican resolve, right? But the other part is unifying Democrats to create a clear distinction between us and them. And in my survey, Lee and I survey that we sent out after the last one of these, we asked, hey, who are the Dems that you're really loving right now? Who is doing a really good job in this moment? And we got a pretty diverse, big list of names. I want to call out the five that were top of the list that were repeated most by you all, just so you have a sense of who are the other folks on this call paying a lot of attention to. Should we go in reverse order? Let's just have some fun. So in reverse order, from 5 to number 1, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, a lot of accolades for bold public-facing battles. He's got a feisty way of engaging with Trump. He's currently criticizing him for how Trump is engaging on the wildfires in LA, in the LA area. We've got Tammy Duckworth was number 4, frequently highlighted among by y'all for her incredible. She's just been great on this front. Her questioning in the Senate hearings. She's really kind of no nonsense, and I appreciate she's just like no BS about stuff, but really gets to the details.
Also notable as the lone purple state senator who voted against the Lake and Riley bill. Shout out.
I mean, incredible. I mean, she for good reason, she's on this list.
Yep.
Next on the list, Jamie Raskin. I got to say, I'm a big fan of Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin happens to be my representative now and yours. We're big fans of Jamie. He is brilliant. He has integrity. He is such a clear communicator, and he's been just an amazing figure in the Democratic Party since he joined in hearings and investigations and on TV and communicating. So yeah, big fans of Jamie Raskin. Next on the list, Elizabeth Warren. Need I say more? I mean, come on. One of the favorites of the movement, from the economic reform agenda to vocalness of hearings to, I mean, she's got a plan for things. She's got strategic vision. Even before we came out with the new Indivisible guide, she had, here's how we're going to fight back. And we were so incredibly aligned. She joined us for the launch of the new Indivisible guide. And then top of the list, cited, I would say far more actually than anybody else. And I think this is because, especially the question was, who is performing really well in this moment? Top of the list was AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I understand where people are coming from. She has been consistently, since Donald Trump was sworn into office and even before in the lead up, consistently saying, why the hell aren't Dems fighting back? How can we speak truth to power? How can we show up where people are watching and actually tell them, no, we do not have to go along with this. Here is the damage that this is going to do. And I've just been, she's a brilliant communicator. She always has been. I think in addition to being a brilliant communicator, she is rising to this moment right now. So just to give you a sense of folks who are out there fighting to unify, there are Democrats who are fighting to unify. But the question Linda asked was, can we count on Democrats to fight? And what I would say is, I wouldn't count on any elected official ever to fight. I don't trust that anyone is automatically going to do the hard thing. And for those that do the hard thing, I want to give them positive reinforcement. My goal is not to crap on one Democrat or another in this period. My goal is to unify Democrats against what MAGA is doing. So that means when you got bad Democratic actions, you got to tell them, hey, that wasn't cool. We don't like that. You 46 Dems who voted for Laken Riley in the House, bad. 12 Democrats who voted for Laken Riley in the Senate, bad. Any Democrats who are talking about finding common ground with this proto-fascist movement that's taken over the White House, bad. But when they do a good thing, like unifying to vote against an anti-trans bill, give them positive reinforcement. When you see an AOC or an Elizabeth Warren or a Jamie Raskin coming out and taking a positive stand, shower some love on them, y'all. These are public officials who want public attention that is positive. Let them know that they've got your support.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would just add, look,
yeah,
some people are more like inclined and more aligned to begin with. But everybody who is in elected office is constantly like monitoring their environment and monitoring all of the inputs they get to decide how firm ground they're on and whether they need to shift their ground a little bit in this direction or a little bit in that direction. So, I have heard from people over the last month or two who said, "Oh, do I have to keep calling? I'm always calling. What good does it do?" What you have to understand is they are constantly monitoring what kind of input, what kind of reactions they're actually getting. And that is how they decide how forward leaning they are going to be, right? Like you've got a lot of median Democratic senators out there right now, and they are actually checking the count of the calls that they are getting to their office on the nominations for an assessment of how much energy is out there. How many people are going to have their backs if they
that's
give
great.
that fiery quote? How many people are going to have their backs if they, take a bold procedural action on a bill next week? You have to continue doing it, and that is very annoying. Like I wish we could all just go on the record once and be like, this is the thing, we're done, okay? But we actually have to continue that reinforcement for them to feel like they're on solid ground.
That's right. I know we have a ton of questions, and I know I answered that question very lengthily, so I'm going to do my best to go through faster. We got a question from Bevins. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing just in that. Can you transcribe these means so I can reread? What a great idea. We have not done that before. I think we can. I'm going to check with the team and see if we can, uh, but we will. Let's circle back to you. I think that is actually
Let's
technologically
take a look.
possible. So if that is possible, in the email that follows up after this tomorrow, hopefully we can have a transcription too. Okay, back to a question that came in ahead of time. Specific question from Judy in Maryland. Do you think the ACA and cutbacks to funding for Medicaid and Medicare will be on Trump's agenda?
Yes. Yes, we do think that.
Hmm.
There are a number of different reports around the places where the Republicans are looking to find cost savings and looking to find budget cuts in order to support extending the Trump tax cuts and or new massive tax giveaways to the rich. One of the places that have come up, or the places among those places are adjustments to the ACA that would create revenue and Medicare and Medicaid. So absolutely, those are places that we are monitoring for Republican threats.
Got a question from
Sorry, I'll
oh,
just add,
no.
and that is a big fight. It is coming up. It is not going to
Indeed.
be a surprise. We are going to keep you posted. This is going to be the point this year where we drag them down in a long, extended fight and push them on exactly how terrible their plans are for working people all over the country and define them by the worst of what they are trying to do. You're going to be part of that. We're going to be part of that. Yes, there is a risk, and also we are going to gear up and fight them every step of the way. When we beat them on the Affordable Care Act, when we first defeated their attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they had a 43 seat margin in the House of Representatives. Okay. They've got a 3 seat margin in the House of Representatives this time. So none of this is like, oh, they're coming for it and it's done.
Yep.
It's like they're coming for it. They're not ready for us. We're going to fight them every step of the way.
Great. A question from the chat. Lisa Latham asked, name two or three truly unbiased news outlets. I would say can I just confess something to y'all? My goal is actually not an unbiased news outlet. My goal is a pro-democracy news outlet. I actually want my news outlet to be biased in the direction of democracy. I do not want them to say, this is what the fascists say, and here's what the pro-democracy folks say. You decide. I actually want them to call out what the authoritarians are doing. And I want them to focus in on here is what's actually happening in the world, and here's what the people want and believe. And with that in mind, I mean, we can just brainstorm. a new effort by Jen Rubin, the contrarian that I talked about in my in the last newsletter. There's a magazine called Bolts, which focuses on
That's
local.
incredible.
I mean, it's brand new in the last couple years or so,
Mhm.
but does incredible deep dives into policy and politics at the state and local level. It's just information you often can't find in other places. There's Anand Giridharadas, who wrote the book The Persuaders. He's got a newsletter media outlet called The Ink that I would highly recommend. Leah, other things that pop into mind for you?
All of those, Mehdi Hassan's new entity,
Zateo.
he's been gathering like a very impressive set of
That's right.
commentators and reporters there. I'm going to go with an unorthodox one. I think people should be subscribing to The Onion. I think that
I love
the
it.
not because they're going to break all the news, but because they have a cultural impact that can go way beyond some of the places that reach those of us who are news junkies.
Great. Okay, back to questions that were asked ahead of time. The question from Anne in Iowa: How do we cope and survive with another Trump regime, especially since I live in Iowa, the new quote unquote Florida of the North?
Yeah. Oh, it's a big question. It's a big question. And I think the answer has to be um a bit about who you are and what you need right now to get through, and a bit about how do we collectively find power together, right? The first I think is you got to give yourself permission to decide what is going to give you energy and what is not going to give you energy during this time. So personally, I am still organizing at the same rate and pace and intensity that I was in 2017, but I have given myself permission to not jump on every single news cycle the same way that I did in 2017. Not because I don't think that everything is horrible, but because I want to actually put my energy into the work that we are collectively doing, the strategy that we are collectively doing to push back and make change. So I think one, you've got to like decide what is going to help you and what is going to hurt you to stay in the fight. Second, I think like you're talking about being in Iowa. Um, a lot of the places that are a lot of red states, and I would count Iowa, to a fairly significant or fairly real extent there, right? These are the playbooks, the laboratories for what is now being rolled out at the national level. Like a lot of the stuff that we are seeing come down the pike right now was piloted in red states, and so was resistance, right? There are a lot of folks across red states who have a lot to teach the rest of us about what it means to operate under the conditions of authoritarian creep, under repressive state systems, under enforcement of the law for some and not for others, right? So I would say, again, getting into community, figuring out who is organizing in your community, what they need, and how you can be in alliance with them, partnership with them, how you can be in the same place and forming networks with them. Again, they want us to be alone. They want us to feel powerless. They want us to feel like we don't have a chance. It doesn't fix everything to get organized and get together, but it is the start. It is the start of anything.
That's right. We got a question earlier. How many people are on? About 2,000. These are Indivisible leaders, Indivisible members, people on the email list, people are joining from elsewhere. Welcome. It's great to have you all here. It's um, uh, a quick question from Marie Herring. What is a good texting app that we could use that is trustworthy? I think the go-to answer for most folks in this space is Signal.
Signal.
One thing I would note about Signal, so Signal is encrypted end to end, but if you are getting push notifications on for instance your iPhone that says, "Hey, you got a signal," that push notification actually goes through a different system and the FBI can actually get that push notification. So I would encourage you to turn off push notifications if you're using Signal, but Signal is the go-to tool that people use for texting. Um,
Right.
so
And I think everyone knows this. WhatsApp is also encrypted. It is owned by Facebook. I would recommend Signal.
yep, agreed. Uh, This is a good point to get into this. So we got actually I just saw this a question that came in from Marianne Monk. How do we get a seat at the DNC? And this is related to several questions that came in ahead of time. I'm just scrolling down to get them. Barbara Joe from Massachusetts asked, will Indivisible use its influence to urge DNC voting members to support vote-getting guru Ben Wickler as DNC chair? Nick from Connecticut asked, does Indivisible have any guidance for the DNC chair election, which is coming up right around the corner? Um, so all these questions, these are not the first questions that we've had coming about the DNC chair race. And I mentioned earlier, we wanted to take a temperature check of folks here on the call. And I do want to take this as an opportunity to actually get your thoughts and help inform our work over the next few days on this. So I want to introduce a poll that we're going to do of folks here right now. Um, and I want to introduce this by first saying that, oh, well, the poll is up. Uh, but you're fine. You can take it. The basic poll is who should Indivisible endorse for DNC chair? Now, Indivisible isn't an arm of the Democratic Party. Uh, Sometimes we work with the party, sometimes we work to push the party to be better. I want the Democratic Party to be better. Don't get me wrong. And Ben Wickler, who's the name that comes up again and again among Indivisible group leaders that mentioned me, he's been endorsed by a ton of close allies of ours, the teachers unions, SEIU, AFSCME, Move On, PCCC, Mallory McMorrow, Stacey Abrams. So
Yeah.
just a lot of great folks who
And
we
I'd
love.
like to mention also a lot of Indivisible groups. I think
Yep,
the Grassroots Connector has been collecting different endorsements from Indivisible and grassroots folks.
that's right. And I personally think the world of Ben. We've been working with Ben since 2017 when he was at Move On. He gets grassroots organizing. As DNC candidate, he is committed to this 50-stage strategy of like actually investing and organizing on the ground rather than just throwing money down the toilet to consultants. I think that's a good idea. I think most importantly, even if I didn't know him and hadn't worked with him for the past 8 years, he is, I think, without a doubt, the most effective Democratic Party chair in the country. He runs the Wisconsin Democratic Party, and if you look at across all the battleground states, we lost all of them. It was not close where we did the best. Wisconsin, far and away, we did the best in, and I think that's a credit to Ben's work. And so when we look at the DNC race right now, it's pretty tight. Most folks say that the front runner is this. I have no beef with him, the current DNC vice chair, Ken Martin, but it's not decided yet. And the way it gets decided is 400 plus committee members have to make up their minds, and then they vote, and then we have a new DNC chair. So the point of this poll, this is not we're not voting to make an indivisible decision countrywide. It's a temperature check. I wanted to take this temperature check because if there is genuine support to entertain this question, I think we could toss this to a formal vote for indivisible group leaders over the weekend. So if you could take the poll, tell us, should we endorse nobody? Is there one of these other candidates that you think we should be endorsing? Is it Ben or is it somebody else? If there's overwhelming interest, then we can go from there. Leah, anything else?
Yeah, I just emphasizing, ultimately we really want to see where group leaders are. We know that, being on a Zoom does not mean the entire Indivisible network's been represented, but we do want to get we want to use this space, like we said, as kind of a pulse check, a place where we get intel, a place where we get the sense of the network. And so this is an experiment for us too. So
Yeah,
thank you for being part of it with us.
that's right. We're not committed to one action one way or the other. Is it possible to show the poll if we have, for folks on the back, Jules or Saskia or Shay, if we have enough that have come in? Oh my
Wow.
Lord.
Okay.
That, you know what? That is pretty overwhelming. I did not know what to expect. We said we would show. I'm seeing the results at the same time y'all are seeing them. So this is um about 86%. We should probably take a screenshot of that. 86% have said Ben, we should go. About 8% said no one. There's some distribution among everybody else. This is interesting. This is quite interesting, y'all. I think so. Here's what we will do. Here's what I can commit to us doing. We're going to take this information. We're going to take it back to the team. We know the election is coming up, so we're going to move forward with any kind of national endorsement. Again, this is not a decision Lee or I make in our bedroom. That's not how this works. We are not the leaders of this movement. The leaders are spread out all over the country. So I want you to know we will take this back and we will ask the group leaders in the movement to actually tell us, should we issue a national endorsement? So I think that's a good next step. I appreciate y'all entertaining this experiment and telling us which way we
Yeah.
should go.
The other thing I would just say, we have done a version of this kind of like take a decision to the group leaders, voting via group leaders in the past. If you are a leader and you're like, how do I get on that email list? You should contact your Indivisible organizer and just make sure that they know that you are an active Indivisible leader, because we try to maintain this active list of all the leaders that we're in touch with. Sometimes, we don't get somebody, sometimes we aren't in touch for a little while and we might not have you on the list. So if you think that you should be on that list, then please let us know.
Back to regularly scheduled programming. Let's talk about questions that came in. So we got a question from Howard. Howard W. in Virginia asks, is there any hope of successfully challenging any of Trump's nominees, for instance, Gabbard, Command, Long vote?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is yes, not all of them and not not as many as frankly we should be able to overturn just on the basis of like the wildly unqualified and, shockingly awful people that we're talking about on a lot of these nominations. But there's definitely a chance with some folks. Now, we launched Nix the Noms a couple of weeks ago, and that when we specifically focused on some of the candidates or some of the nominees where we saw potential vulnerability. So Hegseth is one, Kash Patel, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. Each of those, the line is a little bit different, right? So Hegseth obviously has been in the headlines over the course of this week. Wildly unqualified, incredibly dangerous record of violence against women. Also, just simply an absolutely bananas choice for the Department of Defense and insulting to everybody in any service. There is, I think folks may have seen that Murkowski just announced that she is voting against him. Obviously, we have to hold all the Democrats and flip three Republicans to get to a successful nominee being overturned. We are hearing some whispers around Gabbard. I think there's been some
Yeah,
reporting on that
that's
actually
right.
broke today that there's real concerns. We're looking at places where you can actually break off a significant portion of Republicans. There are some real concerns about her ties to foreign governments, as one might be concerned about if one is at all paying attention. And then, folks like RFK Jr., where anybody who is looking at the totality of his record should be horrified by the idea that he is going to be in charge of the incredible powers of Health and Human Services. So, yes, there is. What I would emphasize too, though, is that the first thing we have to do is unite Democrats because we are in no way confident that we are going to get unanimous Democratic opposition to people like RFK Jr. And if we cannot get that, then we do not have hope of breaking off those purple Republicans who we are going to need to win. So whether or not you think you need to call your member of Congress or your senator on this, you need to call or sorry, you actually need to call your senator. Your member of Congress does not get a vote.
That's right.
Whether or not you think you need to call your senator, you need to call your senator.
That's right. Um, Question. We're just going to try Zoom through. I'm just trying to serve them up. Claire from Louisiana asks, can you please discuss targeting of Chicago by ICE and lessons learned for other cities?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I do want to note, I think there are Chicago people that I am seeing in the chat,
That's
and I
right.
know that there is a bunch of organizing happening in Chicago and the greater Chicago area around being prepared for the raids that have been telegraphed by the Trump administration. There's been, a series of lists of cities going around, but the clear strategy that the Trump administration is planning to launch or has said that they're going to launch is around going in kind of big in to continue their shock and awe approach in blue states and blue cities where they can really kind of, show their might, for lack of a better term. Now, I think a couple of things. Like there is the on the ground response. There is what do immigrant rights groups need? What are the policies that are already in place? Are they being exercised? Is there a meaningful, organized grassroots response? If you are in an Indivisible group, if you are part of that infrastructure, it's just about being ready and it's about working directly with the targeted communities. I think for the rest of us too, though, there's a bunch of questions around how these stories land and how they are framed to the broader public that the rest of us need to be ready for, right? Because fundamentally, when you look at, how Americans understand what is happening right now, um, Americans actually do not want the kind of horrible disruptive stuff that they are talking about. I know, Ezra, you talked about this at the beginning, but the Trump administration is preparing to roll out raids that are cruel, that are chaotic, that are disrupting communities, that are, creating fear in a much broader set of people, that are having massive disruptions in places that do not want them. And I think all of us have a role to play in speaking out against these things happening, speaking out both for the human cost of what's happening, but also for the community cost of what's happening. And, making this not a situation where immigrants feel like they have to just defend themselves, but one where they feel like they've got a full community at their back talking about why this is incredibly disruptive, this is incredibly painful, this is incredibly chaotic for the rest of us.
Yep. We got a question about why I just saw it go through in the chat as you were talking about why so many Democrats voted for Lincoln Riley.
Yeah.
And again, there were 12 Democrats in the final bill, 12 Democrats in the Senate, and 46 Democrats in the House. And what I would my take on this, honestly, is I think Democrats right now in this post-election period have felt somewhat rudderless and leaderless. They lost an election, they lost the House, the Senate, the presidency. There are differing ideas out there about why did they lose. A dominant idea is that they weren't strong enough on immigration, that they needed to demonstrate that they were hard on border enforcement and hard on immigration. And this was a bill that was out there. And it acquired some Democratic support, which gave it momentum. And once it built up momentum, the Republicans in the Senate saw that and they fast tracked it. And once Republicans were fast tracking, that sense of momentum matters a lot. Do you think that members of the Senate and members of the House read through a bill before they vote for it? Do you think that? As a former congressional staffer, for a good member, for a brilliant member, I can tell you, members of Congress do not do that. That basically never happens. The way they judge whether or not to vote is a complex calculus of what is the energy out there? What's the current political environment? What kind of blowback am I going to get? How is this going to be used against me? Somewhere in there, if you're lucky, if you've got a really good member, they might ask, is this good policy or not? But the reason for this collapse within the Democratic Party on this specific bill was there was no leadership in the Senate on this. Senator Schumer did not lead on it. There was no leadership in the House. Minority Leader Jeffries did not whip on this. And so Democrats were left on their own to make that calculus on their own. And that kind of thing happens in the absence of strong leadership, in the absence of strong pressure from the outside. Our goal is not to just hit those 46 Democrats or just hit those 12 Democrats in the Senate. We want them unified. We want them welcomed over to our side. And what we would like to see is a Senate Minority Leader Schumer who corrals all of the Democrats to say no. We'd like to see a Minority Leader Jeffries corralling all of the Democrats to say no. I got muted. That's precisely what Democrats in the House did on the anti-trans bill. They did a brilliant job. There's this bill that would have, could have forced localities it's gross, just let me say, gross, to inspect the genitals of girls and women who wanted to play sports. That's what the bill would have done. And instead of rolling over and say, oh, we're worried about attacks on trans kids, we're worried about us being criticized on this, Democrats unified and went on offense. And through that unification, they were able to stop bad legislation. That's the model. That's all we want. I want to be out there thanking Democrats for unifying, not criticizing them for caving. I think that's good on policy grounds. Less harm will be done. It's also good politics. It will also lead to us having a 2026 midterm election where we stand for one thing and the GOP stands for something deeply unpopular.
I would just also add, I think that it depends. I think it matters a lot whether you're thinking about, taking a vote like Lake and Riley as cauterizing a wound or just like kind of a temporary band-aid, right? Because,
Yeah.
sorry, go with this metaphor with me for a second. Like, I think some set of Democrats were like, oh, I'll take this vote. That'll brand me as tough on immigration, and that'll be that. The problem is the GOP also gets a vote, right? Like they're going to look at this and they're going to say, oh, weakness. Democrats are freaked out. What bad bill can we bring up on immigration next week, right? And they're already moving the next bad bill on immigration because they saw this level of collapse in the Democratic side, because they saw this level of weakness, right? So I don't think that I think people need to understand it's not like one choice. It's a choice about an overall posture and strategic orientation that will set the table for what happens next and how the GOP responds. And you're not going to fix it by just having, taking one vote. You actually have to have a way where you reframe the story of what is happening and you find ground you can stand on and defend.
That's right. Question that came in, good practical question for Mary Ann. When emailing senators about nominees, and I would apply this to basically any legislation, is it more effective to send one email per nominee, or should we do it all in one single email? Great, very
Great
tactical
question.
question. I can say from my experience as a congressional staffer, we get messages in all the time from constituents. And what you would do is like code the message a certain issue, and then you would there's something called legislative correspondence. And a legislative correspondent is like the bottom rung of legislative staffers. And a legislative correspondent's job, more or less, is to take in all of the messages from constituents, identify who's a constituent, who's not. The non-constituents, they don't get answers. The constituents, okay, you got to get a response to them. So they got an email in, you got a fax in at the time. That's betraying how long ago I worked in Congress. You get calls in, they get
You got a carrier pigeon.
carrier, yeah. But you get these messages in, and it's like, okay, I got to respond to Bob Smith who doesn't like Hegseth. Um, I code the message as against Hegseth. And,
Hegseth pro or Hegseth anti
right.
is how it's going to show up in this
Exa
calling system.
exactly. And then I write a template email, and then for all the Hegseth pros, they get one template email, and for all the Hegseth antis, they get a related but different email. And when I'm giving a tally sheet to the legislative director, the chief of staff, whoever it may be, I'm going through and I'm tallying all the ones that were coded pro Hegseth and anti Hegseth. So this is all a long-winded way of saying to Marianne, actually, there is a danger if you say I'm against A, B, C, D, E, F, that you get one code for that because you can't necessarily get coded all the way.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to treat every nominee as an individual fight. So when the Hegseth vote is coming up, send an email, make a call, show up at the congressional office, and talk about Hegseth. When the vote on RFK Jr. is coming up, same deal. If you combine multiple asks in one, I don't think it is as impactful.
Yep, that's right.
I love that it's just a good tactical question about how to have impact. We got another tactical question. Somebody in the chat asks, how impactful is it to call our representatives that are clearly in favor of what Trump is doing? I'm in Florida and I'm about to start calling, but honestly, not sure how it helps. And I feel for you as somebody who grew up in Texas. Leah, do you want to take on for right-wing reps and senators? Does calling make a difference?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that we talk about in the updated Indivisible guide for this era is, the ways the Republican Party has shifted and the ways our own theory of advocacy has shifted in response. And so I think the short answer is it's very unlikely to matter in a way that you can see, right? Like your Rick Scott is not going to go out and be saying, "Oh, I've had a change of heart due to the overwhelming outpouring of constituent gatherings against, Hegseth, et cetera, in my district." It does matter a little bit at the margins in terms of them assessing, exactly how much opposition they are seeing in their own state. But fundamentally, at this point, the Republican Party has consolidated in a way where most Republicans are more worried about a primary challenge than they are worried about a general election challenge from the other side. And so that does limit the extent to which we see calls to Republican offices moving the needle on like a decision like this. Now, again, it's not quite the same if you're talking about like a Susan Collins, right? A Susan Collins, I would absolutely say, yes, it's impactful, it's important, you should call. I'm going to still say you should call Rick Scott. I think that in intangible ways, it can matter for every member of the Senate to feel like the calls are ringing off the hook. The thing that I'm doing is unpopular. You don't always predict the way it's going to affect how they move in Washington, but it can matter. So I would say still call, but I don't want to promise you either that it's going to, immediately change his opinion or that it's going to show up in a public way.
Yep. Moving on to there are a set of questions that came in on strategies, tactics, taking action ahead of time. Linda from Washington asked, after contacting a senator multiple times for a response on how they will vote, no one calls you back after these calls, then what? I've said this before. So first of all, you got a couple of good senators. And so it's actually, I would say, disappointing that they are not getting back in touch with you, and they should get back in touch with you. As a constituent, if you are getting in touch with your senator, your representative, your city council person, doesn't matter, and you are expressing your opinion on a policy issue, the baseline expectation that you should have is that you will receive a response. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a letter, but you're going to receive something. But it is a good idea to explicitly ask for that. Say, when you call, give your contact information, give your address so that they know you're a constituent, and say, I would like a response. And this is really going to make sure that you get it. Ask for the name of the person who you are talking to. Maybe it is an intern, maybe it is a legislative correspondent, but if they know that you know who took the message and you didn't receive a response, they are going to be worried that you might follow up with somebody higher than them and get them on the phone and say, I talked to Bob and Bob said he would get back to me and I didn't get a message from Bob. That is important. Do not underestimate the power of being a pain in the butt. That is a power for a
Or
constituent. So you don't not I'm not saying be mean. Do not curse, do not yell, be polite, but you can be firm and you are allowed to have the expectation that you get a response. So if you're not hearing and if you repeatedly don't get a response, you can escalate. You can escalate. And an escalation looks like writing an op-ed to your local paper saying, I've called the senator's office 12 times since Trump got it inaugurated. They have never responded, not once. Escalation can look like inviting them to an indivisible statewide convening in Washington and saying, hey, we have not heard from you. Would you like to come and speak and address your constituents? And if they decline to speak, you can bring a cardboard cutout of them. You can bring a live chicken on stage to represent them. You can bring whatever you want, but you can escalate if they decline to engage with you. It is your job to express your opinions as a constituent. It is their job to respond. And that is baseline. So I would be frustrated if I were you, even though your two senators are good senators. They generally are really on the right side of things. Anything else? Okay. Zooming right through. Okay, we got questions from uh oh, great question from Marcia in California. Are you working in conjunction with other organizations in order not to overlap and duplicate efforts? All
yeah.
the time.
It's a great question. Yes, we are consistently in touch with other organizations. We work on strategy together. I know folks may have been part of the big post-election movement call that we did with about 100 other organizations. That's like one example of the kind of thing that comes together, not in the heat of the moment in the last 24 hours, but because there's a bunch of pre-election planning around what are we going to do collectively, right? And that's a collaborative, and those are conversations that were happening before the election and have been happening since the election as well.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Oh, I'm seeing
Sorry, but I will
oh,
say one other thing on that. I do think that, we are as different organizations, we talk to people in different ways, and we often have different kind of theories of change or ways that we mobilize. And so I know from your perspective, sometimes it's like, I just got 5 emails from 5 different organizations. And I get that. I am also on the email list, but like we actually often are doing slightly different things. We're doing messaging in ways that are going to resonate with somewhat different populations of people. We're coming at it in our own unique angles, or we're applying like our different organizing models. So I know sometimes it can feel like I'm getting a lot of emails, but do trust that we are often trying to work together in a meaningful way.
great. I see some comments, and we saw this before that you are behind me and I'm in front, and this is not this is because of the how bad our little nook is right here, and that I'm going through the questions. But I will
Your
try.
chair is
Yeah,
big.
my chair is too big. I will do my best to allow Leah to lean forward. She's got better answers than me anyway. But I appreciate all constructive criticism, y'all, and I will try to adjust. Okay, we got a good question from Ed in Washington. This is actually core to our strategy. How can we slow down Trump initiatives on the ground outside of social media?
Absolutely. So, uh, first, find your local Indivisible group, because this is really a thing that requires local organization and local strategy development. It is going to be harder to do as an individual, but the big thing, and I know that there's a powerful Washington Indivisible network, and I know that some of you are on the call right now. So, shout out to y'all. Look, if you're in a blue state like Washington, we should be asking our state legislators, we should be asking our mayors, we should be asking our counties, we should be asking our governors, what are we doing to insulate the state? What are we doing to protect standards that will protect not only Washingtonians, but other people around the country? What are you doing to ensure that I'm safe, that my neighbors are safe? How are you going to respond if they try to roll out a set of immigration raids here? How are you going to respond, in the following situations? What are you doing with the state's pension fund? And is it going to companies that are enabling Trump? All of the above, right? We've got some ideas in oh yeah, the Blue State Guide I see is getting linked in the chat.
Great, great.
It's not exhaustive, right? People are going to come up with strategic ideas. We're going to learn from each other as we go. But fundamentally, the first step of this is governors, state legislators, local elected officials getting the sense that there is a groundswell of people out there asking them to figure out how to be creative and use their power to fight back. Now, some of this stuff is stoppable, in local and meaningful ways, right? Like we talked about, what does your local school system have in place to protect immigrant communities, right? Those are kind of like very concrete, simple, how do you throw sand in the gears locally sets of questions. There's also going to be stuff around state policy. There's also going to be stuff around county policy. Are you in a sanctuary city or county, et cetera? So just thinking creatively about all of the different levers that you have, and then how are you organizing to deploy them?
I'll just add to that. One thing that I'm excited that Indivisible is going to be supporting, if you happen to live in one of the 15 Democratic trifecta states, so these are states that have a Democratic governor and a Democratic state legislature, they have the power to go on offense, to be entrepreneurial and actually fight back against Trump. We're going to be supporting statewide convenings in those states. If you're part of the Indivisible network, you probably heard from this from your organizer. It's brand new. We just committed to this last week. You'll be getting more information about it. But I think there's a big opportunity right now, especially in blue states, to get in front of new people who are viewing what's coming out of the administration saying, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. What can I in Washington, in Illinois, in California, in New York, in Oregon, what can I do? We need those people with us, and we want them to help push your elected officials at the state level to go on offense. That's exactly as Leah is saying. So I would love to see in the first over the course of the next few months statewide convenes of people who are gathering in these blue states saying, we don't stand for this. Our governor doesn't stand for this. Our attorney general doesn't stand for this. Our state legislature doesn't stand for this. And getting those people into the movement, making them indivisible leaders themselves, helping spawn new indivisible groups or getting them connected elsewhere. So stay tuned for more there, but I hope to see a lot of those around the country. And to whatever extent Lee or I can, we'd love to come, love to support however we can. Good practical question here from Kathy. Love it. Please share 1 to 3 of the most doable action items for this week. Kathy from Washington. Oh, a lot of questions from Washington this week.
Doable action items for this week?
Yeah, for this week, what can folks do?
Okay, well, so we got to if you have not contacted your senators about your about nominations, you got to contact your senators about nominations. If you have a elected official who, well, sorry, if you have an elected official, your House representative voted either yay or nay on Lake and Riley, call them and let them know that you either appreciate them or that you do not appreciate them. Ezra, what do you think about state and local actions today, this week?
Well, I mean, this is what I led with, so sorry not to be redundant, but we will post this 16-page Google Doc guide about how to show up in your school district and push for a support for immigrants and their families who are under threat by this administration. If I had to choose three, I think those are the three. The other thing I would highly encourage you to do, if you're not already on it, Indivisible's email list, we try to keep it as practical as possible. We are a grassroots movement. We're funded by grassroots dollars. Sometimes we're going to ask you for money. The vast majority of the time, that's not what we do with our email list. What we try to do with our email list is actually say, hey, here's what's happening in the world. Here's how you can have impact. And every week we send something that says, here's what's coming up this week, whether it's a nomination or an attack in local communities or a piece of legislation. So I would encourage you to sign up and encourage you to forward it over to other folks to get more action. So this is a people-powered movement. We have impact when lots of us actually organize. We're going to keep on zooming through. I will just note, we had a whole poll that took up some time, so I'm going to commit to us going over by about 10 minutes so we can get through more questions. If you got to drop, you got to drop. We will still share the full recording out to everybody afterwards, but I don't want to drop all these questions that have come in. Okay. Got a question on community organizing and coalition. Sharon from New York asks, how do we talk to those around us who are either fleeing or frozen?
Well, if they're fleeing, you have to run after them, I guess. But look, here's what I would say. I think people are going to process differently, and different people are in different situations, right? Some people are really directly feeling the personal threat because they are directly personally threatened. I know a number of federal employees this week who are processing just the unbelievably hostile, nasty stuff that is being rolled out at the federal government, across the federal government, dedicated people, and who are just trying to understand, like, are they safe? Are their jobs safe? Is the stuff they work on safe? I know a lot of people who are worried for their families right now, who are worried for the physical safety and well-being of their families. Obviously, we are seeing people who are feeling both, personal, like livelihoods and physical well-being and benefits and everything in between. So, one, I think just being sensitive to the fact that some people are going to process things differently right now. Um, Different people are going to move through the stages of grief at different paces. Not everybody has to like get back up and run to the fire right now. You want to create some space for people to, take a step back if they need it, to focus on themselves if they need it, etc. And you want to do that with compassion. And also, you want to offer them compassionate, supportive on-ramps into action as they are getting engaged. So, what I would say in general is, don't necessarily take it as we need you tomorrow. The movement needs you, but it doesn't need all of you right now, all the time. So create some space, give people a little bit. The other thing I would say is identify the things you can do, right? The thing that is absolutely burns people out is not doing too much. It is doing stuff that doesn't feel like it matters. And so right now, the entire idea behind Trump's chalk and awe approach is to make people feel disempowered, to make them feel like the wave of things that are happening is so massive, is so impossible to counter that you might as well just give up and check out for good. We counter that not by taking it all on right now, right? Like we're not in charge of the federal government. We don't have the commensurate ability to do that, but by identifying the things that we do control, identifying the things that we can move, figuring out where we plug in locally and we do our piece, right? And we trust that we are collectively part of a movement, that if we all take our individual piece and individual thread and pull, then we can unwind this, tap this whole thing.
Yep. Going to do some quick questions to get through. How to talk about setting up networks of state chapters. Michael Olnick asked, just simply will say, so Indivisible has about 1,100 local Indivisible groups all around the country. That's a brand new census as of Friday. We have confirmed there are 1,100 active groups. About 210 of those have formed just since the election. And in about half of states, about 25 states, there are statewide coordinating indivisible groups. These are structures that coordinate the indivisible groups all around the country. If you are an indivisible group that would like to set that up, you should get in touch with your local organizer. We have local state lead organizers all around the country. If you want to set up a state lead and you don't currently have one, we want to help you. We do. We want to help you because we think it's important for indivisible groups to do their own work, but also we're more powerful if we coordinate across the state. Uh, there's a good question here in Strategies and Tactics from Joan in Michigan. How do we determine whether or how many of our members are following through on requests to call and write your legislators? Um, this is so tricky. Can I just tell you, this is such a difficult question to ask. It sounds simple, right? Like, can't we just figure out how many people made the call on Hexeth? And the answer is it's very hard to do. It is very hard to do. Indivisible National, sometimes we run our own tools to say, call against Lake and Riley. We did that and we drove, maybe 5,000 calls over the course of a few days against Lake and Riley. But those 5,000 calls, they're only calls that used our tool. Plenty of Indivisible group leaders and members, they know how to call their member of Congress. It's in their phone. So they're not using our tool to call. And that's fine. I just want people to call, first of all. But tracking whether the action was taken is trickier than it sounds. So different groups have set up different systems for doing this. If you're a local Indivisible group and you're trying to organize your members to do it, you should be creating some sort of system to say, has everybody done it? Check in if you have indeed called or emailed. We've seen folks use text chains on their Indivisible groups. So there's one text chain and everybody is on it and say, hey, we're all calling tomorrow at 2 p.m. or something to that effect. I would highly encourage you, if you can, to use the Indivisible tool, because if you use an Indivisible tool, we are able to tell press, oh yeah, we drove 20,000 calls on HR 9495, on the nominations, on the Lincoln Riley bill, whatever it might be. And then we're able to build a sense in Congress that, yes, indeed, the public is angry about this or the public is happy about this. But it is not a minor question. It
Yeah.
is, for those of us organizing people power, this is a challenge of demonstrating what is that people power? How big is it? And it's something we should all wrestle with.
That's great. Yeah, that's right. The other thing I would just add is I think it also depends on the mechanism by which you communicate with people. If you are on a 10-person signal chat, everyone report back on what they say when you call, right, to
Yeah.
each other, talk about it. If you have like a multi-thousand person email list, I would not recommend that, right? So just think about, is there a way that you could socially reinforce each other depending on the platform that you have?
Yep. Um, Brian Silver, just basic question, asked, will the video of this call be archived for later reference, and how, if so, how to access it? We will, it certainly will be available. We're not hiding anything. I believe actually,
I think it goes on our YouTube
yeah,
channel.
I was just gonna say, it goes on our YouTube page. So now that I said that, Brian, yes, it'll go on our YouTube page, so you'll be able to access it there, and we'll always have these posted. Um, Y'all, I just want to reflect back to you the fact that there are 468 questions that are open and unanswered right now, and I am not going to be able to get to all of these questions. I am interested, can I just say, th there is so much engagement here, and I want to authentically engage with you all. I think we need to do a better job figuring out how do we identify what are the top questions in the movement, maybe ahead of time. Maybe there's a tool we can do in real time so we can say, okay, here's what there's a lot of energy around. We definitely want to get to those. I think right now, when we started these chats, we had, a couple hundred people on. We have 10 times that number of people now. So I think the existing systems we have for doing a good job answering all the questions that come in, I think they're inadequate. I'm just going to say that out loud. I will commit to you to working with the team to figure out how can we sort through these either in real time or ahead of time so I don't leave y'all hanging. Because I hate seeing 470 people not have their questions answered. You are all wrestling with important questions in your own community, trying to build up this pro-democracy movement, and I want to help you. And it pains me to not be able to spend, the next 2 weeks going through with you and answering all of them. So just wanted to call that out. Um, we'll cover maybe just a couple more,
Yeah,
and then we'll
one more and
follow.
then close out.
Yeah, and then we'll follow up tomorrow, like I said, with all the links that we had. We will follow up with some of the responses to the survey that we sent out last time, and we'll have another survey. I don't know what the question is going to be yet. I'll review some of the questions that we weren't able to get to, but we'll have another question. I would highly encourage you to fill out that survey. We legitimately use the information to change what we're doing. So if you have a couple of minutes, just share some answers. This might be a nice one to end on for Judy from Arizona, because I think it reflects what a lot of folks are wrestling with right now, both whether they're in the indivisible movement or more broadly. Judy says, can I disengage from the news and still effectively resist and oppose?
I mean, look, I think there are different kinds of news consumption. I think you can decide that it is not your job to, consume every single story, to stay abreast of, like read all the way through every single development. You can, not to toot our own horn, but you could decide that what you're going to do every week is do all of the asks in the Indivisible top 5 things to do this week and not do anything on, so there are ways, I'm not saying that you should just do that. You should actually also get to your local Indivisible group and do
Yes.
what they want you to do too. Um, Again, I think we have to set our own boundaries here. I think that the most important question you need to ask yourself is what is going to keep me in the fight? Because we got a fight ahead of us, and you have to think about what do you need to stay whole, to keep your heart right, because they're trying to make us cruel the way that they are cruel, and we have to figure out how do we actually hold what makes us, what makes us good, what makes us committed to being good to each other, what makes us keeping our values as we go. That's going to look different for different people. If it means you're going to scale down to, 30 minutes of social media max a day, great, totally good. If it means you need to sometimes just take a break and be totally offline, also totally good. Figure out what you need to stay in the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I would just
That
plus.
consuming news does not make you a good person. Taking action makes you well, actually, that doesn't make you a good person either, just to be totally honest with you, but it's an important step.
I was just going to plus one lately. I think people do. mm, uh, this isn't indivisible. Indivisibles are incredible because we're action oriented, but there is this, I think, this mistake that folks make that by the act of consuming news is indeed an action that is laudable. I used to be really afraid of flying, and I would spend much of my time in the air, focused on keeping the plane in the air. Intellectually, I knew it didn't do anything. That plane was going to stay in the air or not based on anything related to what I was doing. But I was very focused on keeping that plane in the air. I view consuming the fire hose of news during this administration as something akin to trying to keep that plane in the air. That on its own isn't going to keep the plane in the air. It's not. I'm sorry. So if this is making you distressed, if this is making you more anxious, I will tell you, I did not enjoy flying when I was spending all of my time trying to keep the plane in the air. It didn't get me there faster. It didn't get me there safer. The only thing that is going to work is if we gather together and build our power together. That's what's going to work. You need some amount of information to do that. You can't stick your fingers in your ears and close your eyes and live in a cave and still be an effective organizer for democracy in your community. But by all means, do not feel the need to be on Blue Sky 24/7 or God help you, Twitter 24/7.
Get
Do
off
not
Twitter.
do not feel the need to watch TV news every single night. That is not the most productive use of your time. It's not going to make you feel better either. If I could take 10 hours of TV news watching and replace it with 1 hour of meeting with people in your own community, I do in a heartbeat. It's
Yes.
probably more like 100 to 1 is
Right.
what I would do there. Like Leah said, we try to be a source of no BS truth, an actual analysis of what is going on here. We're not the only source of truth. You should not only be leaning on us. There are other folks in your community who know the threats that are facing LGBTQ members of your community, immigrants, refugees, folks who were targeted by this administration. Reach out to them. Find out what their reality is. Find out what they're feeling. Organize with your own local community in order to show that they are supported. That doesn't mean watching CNN or MSNBC or any other news station at night. That can be a part of it, but you should use that as a tool to help you do the real work, and that real work is connecting your own community.
I'm just gonna close by saying, this last week is there's nobody out there who can say something that's gonna make the events the last few days not feel horrifying.
Yeah,
They are cruel, small people. They are going after everything we care about. They are attacking people we care about. They are undermining the civil rights infrastructure of this country. They are uh, fueling giveaways to billionaires that are going to be funded by the rest of us. They're abominable. We know that, right? Um, they're also at peak strength right now. And it is going to be possible if we're a year in the future, if we are 2 years in the future, if we are 4 years in the future, it's going to be possible to look back on this moment and see, not the peak of their triumph, but the moment when the wheels started to fall off the bus, right? The moment when their coalition started to fracture, the moment when we started to organize. It's possible to look back on this moment and say, oh, yeah, that was the high point. And then they got bogged down in this extended fight over tax cuts for the rich, which, allowed us to flip the script and tell a story about how they were taking your health care to give money to rich people. They got fought back at the local level to protect immigrants, to protect trans kids, to protect people who are under assault. They head into a midterm in 2026 where they get their asses kicked, right? And then we roll right on to 2028. It is possible to imagine all of those things at this same moment. So, yes, they are trying to present right now at the peak of their strength. Think of it as the peak of their strength because if we organize, we can make it so.
that's right, and that's what we're going to do. I hope, many of you next week, next Thursday. Please submit your questions. We'll try to figure out a good way to get through as many as possible. Please, 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 if you can, fill out the survey that's going to follow up tomorrow and send it around to folks. Feel free to send it around to folks. We want as many people here organizing together as possible. That's why we do what we're doing. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for staying a bit late. We got more than 2,000 people who joined over the course of the call, which is, I'm just thrilled that so many people are not just taking a seat. They're not just sinking into depression. Maybe we're sinking into depression, but then we're also fighting back. We're also fighting back because the game, it's not over. It's not over. We still live in a democratic republic. We still have power, and these folks are going down. They're going down. Okay,
All
we will
right.
see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.